Welcome everyone. I'm so excited you're here, that you made it in spite of the constant rain that freed us these days. So, Thomas Hübl is a modern mystic, spiritual teacher, author, and systems thinker. His work integrates the essence of the great wisdom's traditions, scientific knowledge, and his own embodied clarity of presence. He works with business leaders and innovators in the fields of economics, social science, medicine, collective trauma, and psychology. The principles we'll discuss today are coming from Thomas' work on more than 15 years all across the world, with individuals, with groups, and with large groups of thousands of people working on change processes. And ever since I'm a hardcore business person from MBA, McKinsey background, and ever since I started studying with him and incorporating these principles into my everyday boring work, I found that my impact changed radically and that I can make much more. So I'm really excited to be hosting this dialogue so we can open the conversation into more people. So having said all that, I'll welcome Thomas. There was a lot of interest of the global community around this topic, so we'll be recording Thomas, and we'll only be recording his image and only the voice of the question. So if you have any problem with that, let me know. Okay? Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you, Ingrid, for organizing this event, and good evening. Well, so today I want to take you on a journey through different aspects of what I believe is our inner landscape. And when we talk about innovation and creativity and what's essential, I would love to walk you a bit through your own inner landscape according to those questions. And then after some time we will open a dialogue and look at stuff together. So I love to say that a human being is the lovemaking of the future with the past. And in order to understand innovation, as far as I understand it at least, we have to clarify two things. So where do we come from? And where are we heading to? Or, in other words, the two forces that I believe run us every day. One is becoming, like Eros. Something needs to drive us to be creative, otherwise we wouldn't want to aspire or look for something new. And then there's another force I believe that concerns all of us. This is belonging. Belonging means how we create relation and how we manifest our innovation or inspiration. So on the one hand, the future, in the sense of the wisdom traditions, I believe the future has nothing to do with tomorrow. So tomorrow can just be a repetition of today. So tomorrow is, in my understanding, not necessarily the future. Tomorrow is the future if tomorrow has a new innovation or inspiration or growth or development that exceeds today, or that creates a bigger complexity or a higher perspective than today. So in the mystical understanding, the future is kind of the appearance or the realization of a higher level of consciousness than I have today, with all the innovation that comes with it. And the past has two aspects. So as we are sitting here, I believe we could say, okay, I'm sitting here and this is my body. But actually, if I look at my body is not just my body is a concentrated liquid of evolution. Because most of the thoughts that we think today have been thought already. Most of the emotions that we feel and body sensations that we have, generations before us also had those sensations. So what is actually, when I look at my body is actually a very concentrated liquid or concentrated essence of evolution. And so when we talk about the past, we talk about structures that sit here that either give us stability or we create habits that give us kind of a stability that has too much gravity. And on the other hand, the past can be seen as the unresolved moments, difficulties, traumas that are sitting here as well and that are calling recurrent experiences back again and again and again. So I will say this again. So on the one hand, the past created a lot of substance, physical, emotional, mental substance that sits here in order to have the conversation that we are having. On the other hand, the past can also be understood as the residue or the carry-on luggage that we bring here today. And what I mean by that is, for example, if we have a conversation and then we get into an argument, and within that argument we kind of both feel disturbed, and then you go somewhere, I go somewhere, and then half an hour later I'm still thinking and processing the experience I had with you. So for some time after our conversation, my processor capacity, my computing power is busy with processing that event with you, that argument, that situation. So my computing power is not fully available for my next business meeting, for my next interaction, for my time with my wife, because I'm still thinking about our conversation. So in the Far East, they found a word for it, and in the Far East we call it karma. In our terms, maybe we call it, we feel disturbed. But actually, I carry the past with me and I process it in moments later. If that past is called Holocaust, I believe it keeps us busy for generations. And so when we talk about the past, there is a past that is structures in consciousness that develop, and then there is a past that we also often deal with. These are the residues and the carry-on luggages that we take from one flight to the next, and from one flight to the next. And I believe that's an important thing, because the energy that we carry on, sometimes over generations, and I believe the latest research, genetic or epigenetic research, shows that trauma has a transgenerational effect. And that transgenerational effect is, I believe, key in understanding why systems evolve and develop, and why some systems, corporations, institutions cannot adopt innovation. Because there's a difference if we say a system is developing slowly because of lots of habits in the structure of a corporation, or a system is not developing because of trauma. These are two different things and they need a completely different treatment. habits need activation energy in order to move, because habits create gravity. And in the spiritual practice, one aspect that we practice a lot is presence. Why? Because presence, the understanding of presence, is an unclouded awareness within the current moment. But if the past, the Holocaust, the fears, all the stuff that affects my decisions today that I'm aware of or I might not be aware of, so if my presence is limited by an unresolved past or by my addiction to my habits, then the capacity of my ability to be with you here right now is reduced. If my wife becomes my habit, I can be sure that eros will diminish and we will become the habits of each other, which means we don't see each other anymore. So a lot in the relational practice, when two people practice wakefulness in intimate relationships, we practice a lot really looking at each other, not staring at each other, finding out who we are again and again and again. And when we work with our colleagues and team members every day, very quickly we don't see each other anymore. We see the image that we carry in ourselves of each other, which means I don't see you. I already take you for granted. And that's eros death, the death of eros. So the future needs eros. The future actually is eros. Why are we so crazy about innovation? Because creativity, when you think about your most creative moments, how are the most creative moments? What's the quality? I ask this question in many places around the world, and when we think of our most creative moments, what is the quality of very creative moments?
Emptiness. Freedom.
Freedom, emptiness.
Stillness.
Joy, stillness.
Floating downstream.
See that?
Floating downstream.
Floating downstream. Wholeness. Do you feel bored in your most creative moments?
Passion.
Excitement, passion, right. These are qualities that we most probably feel when we feel sexual attraction, and the similar qualities we feel when we have creative attraction. When there is a creative pull and the future really calls us. So we feel excited. So eros, there's sexual eros and there's creative eros. There's the eros that keeps us striving, that keeps us going forward. And that eros is pure joy, excitement, presence, and insight. So the future has a perfume. The future has a fragrance that calls us. And so when the past and the habit has a gravity, and I think all of us most probably know how hard it is sometimes to change a strong habit or an addiction, that there is a gravity to pathways in our brain that are strongly attached to each other, and there is a constant pull. So I believe a human being, as I said, is the love-making of the past with the future, which means we live in a creative tension. And the tension is in between the forces in us that want to stay, that want to rest, that want to create gravity, and the forces that want to become. And in the spiritual practice, I believe that there are different ways of understanding spiritual practice. I look at spiritual practice as a kind of an inner science. I would call this the inner science of human development. And when spiritual practice is, for us most probably, not something that we practice in a cave in the Himalayas, but we practice it here within the marketplace, within the cultural architecture. So I'm talking about a spiritual practice that is a cultural architecture, a conscious cultural architecture. And I believe in order to create anything, we need to have an internal representation, or at least kind of the dawning of an internal representation. In the mystical practice, we talk about building an instrument. So we have practices that create a very strong presence, a presence in the current moment. But in the current moment is kind of a word that is a bit overused. But the current moment in the mystical understanding is the moment that includes the past and the future of this moment. Which means that presence has nothing to do with this moment in time, but with the depth dimension, the depth of sitting here, the depth of listening. And when you, for example, observe this in yourself for a moment, if you observe the nature of listening, right now when you listen to me, what is actually the deepest aspect in you that listens to me right now? When you observe your own experience right now, and you listen, or you look at what's listening right now. So I believe when I look into myself, when I listen, ultimately, so maybe there are some qualities that I can name, but ultimately I will find myself as space, as present space. I can name some structures, but when I keep looking behind the structures that I observe, I'm here. I'm open space. As listening, I'm open space. So in my understanding of inner architecture of a human being, there are three factors that we work with a lot: space, energy, and structure. When we observe a child, everybody here who is a parent knows this. When a child reaches out, so there's one phase of the child that goes out into the world and comes back. So there's curiosity and fear. I'm curious to go out. I'm exploring the world. And when I get too afraid, what do? I run back to my parents. Why? Because I need to be safe. So for some time, there's energy, curiosity, that goes out into the world, increases the radius of life, and then comes back into safety. And then for some time, that impulse goes out and back, until one day you ask your child, so come back? And the child says, no. And then you say, come back, and no. So then suddenly there is another phase, which is through resistance, I get a sense of myself. So suddenly I find out that I am someone by myself. And then, if this process, I believe, goes well, we come to a place of relation. We call this the point of relation. So here, I have to say yes, here I have to say no, and here I have a choice. I can say yes or no. And why I'm saying that? Because I believe all of us went through this phase multiple times, that every function in us go through the same process. So that there is an energy, every time I learn something new, or I intuit something, or there's inspiration, it's energy. In the mystical understanding, the soul is energy. It's kind of 150 gigabyte, let's say. 150 gigabyte of data, information or intelligence, movement. So energy is movement. And so that movement creates itself a pipe, because energy is movement and we need a structure to it. So we create a pipe. And so what the original impulse creates itself a structure through coherence, and that coherence becomes an internal pathway, a connection in our brain, in our body, and creates a road. So the original impulse, that was energy, is now a cable, or the electricity becomes a cable, and that cable channels electricity. And I believe that every function in us goes through the same process until many of those loops create our spine. And so when a human being is space, energy, and structure, then when we have our parents, and I will come back to innovation in a second, but I think that's interesting. And here is our conception, and with the conception there is a line, and this line is our will. This line is, and the most basic will is the will to live, the will to survive. And around this line we create, this is our father and this is our mother, we create structure, a lot of structure, and then we expand our territory and so on. And why I mention this when we talk about innovation, because in the central core of all of us, I believe there is a lot of energy, that through our spine and through our central nervous system there's a lot of energy running, but that energy in the good sense, in a grown-up person, is supposed to have a good structure, a good base, a base that is trustworthy, that is safe, and that gives us a home wherever we are. And that home, that belonging, is the capacity to create relation. So relation is the basic wiring of our home. And that's a home that walks with us. So once that home is installed, that base is installed, it walks with us wherever we go. It's very sustainable. And the reason why I say that, because in the mystical understanding of innovation, we have those three factors: space, energy, and structure. But we also understand innovation as a two-folded process. One is, I realize something, I have an initiation, I realize something new, I have an insight, I have a revelation. I sit in my lab, I sit in my business meeting, I sit in an inspiring conversation, and suddenly, boom, oh wow, I have an insight, I have a wow. And that wow is just the beginning, because now that wow needs to become a startup, needs to become innovation, needs to become a something. And on the way down, in the manifestation, in the way how we walk our talk, how we can translate our inspiration into substance, like the same process that we know from the beginning of our conception, in the same way, I believe we manifest creativity. And so, in order to understand innovation and manifestation, I believe we need to understand the whole process of our current development until today, because a lot of obstacles or difficulties in either having inspiration or manifesting inspiration lies within the pathway of our development so far until today. And so when you think about another term that I like very much is, what is essential? When is a moment essential? What is an essential moment? Why do we, and how do we notice that now there is or was an essential moment?
When you feel you have no choice but to take action.
When you feel you have no choice but to take action?
Or to do something. Whether change your thinking or change your behavior.
Change your thinking or change your behavior. It's an essential moment. And why do we know that this was an essential moment?
It's different.
Hmm?
Something is different.
Something's different.
You consider that the future of your life depends on what happens in that moment.
You can see it's a course correction in your life. That's what you're saying. It's
Not about course correction, but it's a you know. I mean, the times that I can think of for me, it's like this is a moment from which, as Anne was saying, things will change.
right.
As a
Things
result of
will
what I do in
change.
this moment.
Right.
It feels substantial.
It feels substantial. Right. Yeah.
I think there's kind of an alignment where your purpose kind of interfaces with a sort of receptivity in the universe and in relationships and in your community, and it all kind of aligns.
Right. So what I hear is that in essential moments, something moves, something shifts, there's a change. With other words, we could say an essential moment is always creative. So there's always an effect, as we heard, there's an effect of creative moments or essential moments. So when you look at your life, how essential is your life? What makes one's life essential? And what parts of my life do I call essential?
Contribution.
Right, when you just for a moment look for yourself, when you scan certain areas, different areas of your life, where do you find essentiality? And also, like in the mystical exploration, we are constantly exploring like life from 360 degrees. And so what is the part in me that knows that it's essential? What part of me, what's the tool that measures essentiality?
Relationship.
Relation. When you look at yourself, what's the part in you that notices that something was essential? How do you know? What tells you that? What function?
Sense. It's a sense.
It's a sense.
Clarity, you can feel the clarity.
You can feel the clarity.
When you're afraid.
Say that again?
When you're afraid.
When you're afraid? So let's keep that question for a moment. I will most probably come back to it, because I find it very interesting to look, okay, when I look at my life, how much of my life is essential? And what are practices to practice essential moments.
You just did it.
And so what are the practices if we say essentiality is a competence? Essential moments or innovative moments or creative moments, creativity is a competence, not a coincidence. And then there is another aspect, and then at the end I will bring all of those points, hopefully, together. I have one more. If you say, okay, here is the future, here is the past, and let's say here, at the moment, is 2017. And now, the interesting thing to contemplate is, how do I get out of 2017? Or, with other words, what connects me to 2017? And why I'm asking the question, because I find it, first of all, very interesting that my sense perception tells me all the time, at the moment at least, information about 2017. When I look into the room, what do I see? 2017. When I listen into the room, when I touch the room, when I smell the room, it doesn't matter which sense I use, I sense 2017. So my whole sense perception is actually plugged in to 2017. And why is that interesting? Because there are thousands of years of practice how to free oneself in a healthy way. There's a healthy and an unhealthy way. How to free oneself enough from that sense perception in order to not be bound into 2017. And so there are certain inner practices that we can do in order to, and now here's why I'm saying in a healthy way, because in the areas where I'm traumatized and dissociated, I might also not feel connected to 2017. So in the dissociation, I feel maybe distant or not connected, and through a healthy spiritual practice, I actually can create so much space that I'm not anymore bound to 2017. That's a difference. So I include and transcend 2017 in order to free enough capacity. That's the same like looking at one's desktop, and the whole desktop of my computer is full of programs. There's Word, there's Excel, there's all kinds of stuff. And in the spiritual practice, we practice to empty one part of the desktop so that I can see the source code of my operating system. That means that I practice an inner state, or we call it an inner coherence, that is strong enough to open a window in my sense perception that is not caught up and bound and fully identified with the current moment. Which means that when I stand here, that one part of me can be free and open to listen, to listen, to listen. So there is sense perception. If here in the center, that's our heart, or that's the human, that's our essence. And so the past is is very substantial in us. The past, the conditioning, my body, the way that my cells hopefully stick together throughout this talk, and that my emotions, I didn't invent anger, although it would be a cool copyright to have because so many people use it, but actually I didn't invent it. So all of it has been experienced already. So what is actually the new aspect of our life? What's the innovation that we really download into life? And I believe that that's where actually the leading edge of science and the leading edge of the inner science, I believe, meet, is where that emptiness, that spaciousness inside, that has the capacity to listen to something that I like to call a whisper. Because I believe that the future is less loud than the noise of our world today. So that the future is something that we intuit, or that we suddenly know through kind of a sudden revelation or knowing, that it's less loud than our daily busyness. And our daily busyness includes my own thinking, my own emotion, my own body sensation, includes my busyness in my life. And for example, in the Jewish tradition, and I think that's something that sometimes gets misunderstood, is I'm sure you're aware of the kind of tradition of Shabbat, the seventh day. But I believe the reason for the seventh day is if I do not take care of having enough space to reflect the own creative process of my life, I'm a prisoner of my life. If there is not enough space to contemplate the mechanisms, the patterns, the dynamics of my life every day, I'm a prisoner of every day. And then I believe that the essentiality of my life will actually decrease. So I need to be able to look at the dynamics of my life in order to create enough space for insight, to create enough space for revelation. So that all of us, I believe, need a healthy correlation between space, energy, and structure. If there's no space, or not enough space, I will kind of be a prisoner of my life, but I reduce the capacity of innovation. Now, according to my understanding, there's another interesting part, that I believe that to be born is kind of our birthright. And the birthright of a child is a being right, is a right to be. But I have seen many, many people who transformed the right to be into a right to be because we do. So then the being right becomes a doing right. And for example, what does that mean? If a child's supposed to be a child, and the child's supposed to be the child exactly at the age that the child's in. But when either the parents of that child are chronically regressive, or there are other dynamics in the family, and the child needs to take on a role, we step actually out of the being right. We have a right to be. Then we have suddenly a right to do. We need to stabilize the relationship of our parents because there are a lot of conflicts. And suddenly we are outside of our center. And we take on a place that most probably we take on later in life as well, when we work in teams or when we work in institutions or when we are in intimate relationships. We reproduce a similar dynamic. And why is that important? Because in the right to be, I think if we can grow up in that center, we have a healthy correlation. There's enough space, there's energy, and there's structure. If we get out of that center, we start to be overactive, and that overactivity reduces our capacity to listen. And if we reduce the capacity to listen, we lose the seventh day. We lose the air conditioning system in our house. We lose the fresh air. And so when we bring now a few parts and we collect the different items that I brought in until now. So if we say innovation is a two-folded process. It's a process of realizing something new. I have a new idea. And realizing something usually is not something random. It's usually connected to our intelligence. So the piano player that is a great composer and sits 10 hours a day and plays the piano, and suddenly this musician is being played by life so that thousands of people feel it in a concert hall, there is a reason why the concentrated intelligence through a lot of practice and expertise is in a way kind of the lightning rod for lightnings of music. And the same most probably here in the room. There are many people that distilled and concentrated their intelligence in a certain way, and that becomes the lightning rod for high electricity. And so there is, of course, a training, there's a competence, and there's a crystallization of intelligence. But within that, there is insight, and then there is the manifestation of insight. On the other hand, so there is an openness to receive the new. And I believe the new has a subtler voice than the old. So it needs kind of a listening. It needs kind of a exploration, a listening. And then there is this other power in us. This is the gravity in us, the part that doesn't want to change, the part that even doesn't like if other people change too much. If my colleague is more successful than I am, has more insights than I have, and I'm not so interested if, I don't know, the rugby player has more insights, but if it's somebody that does a similar thing that I do, then it's different. So sometimes we even express that envy, that jealousy, that kind of finding all kinds of dark sides in the people that are very successful. Then I really embody the anti-evolutionary voice. But that there is a part in me that is a bunch of habits and that wants to stay the way I am. It's my sense of self. And what I said before, we see it a lot in relationship dynamics when we work with intimate relationships. We see how we actually wire our partner as our sense of self. We wire the habits in our daily life become our sense of self. So if something changes more significantly in our life, our sense of self needs to change. And I believe that's a capacity. Fluidity is a capacity. And as I said before, we all know how hard it is sometimes to change a stronger habit or an addiction, because there are strong forces that, like gravitational forces, that want to stay the way they are. So that needs an inner training, and I believe that we need to sign up to be more fluid inside so that we can be changed. That change is a capacity, something that we can train, I believe. And then I said that the past has two aspects. The past is the pipe system in the house, and we don't want to destroy the pipe system in the house because otherwise the water spills all over. That's not what we want. But we want to be able to discern in a team, in a corporation or an institution, when innovation or change is hard to implement, if it is hard to implement because of the gravity of habits, or if it's hard to implement because of the degree of traumatization in the room. If I activate the field in the one, in the habit possibility, that's the right thing to do. If I create pressure on trauma, it's exactly the wrong thing to do. Because my team will actually resist it more and not grow more. So the past has two aspects. The unresolved past, which creates recurrent experiences that will come back in again and again until they are recognized as such. And then there are the parts that change through activation, through energy. Energy creates a movement. And then I said one capacity I believe that is key when we want to convert innovation into a capacity is to free myself of 2017. That my sense perception is plugged in to our time. And if I want to be able to reach further into the future, we will need to have one part of us being free of that sense perception right now. And there are very strong contemplative or meditative practices that can help us to empty one part of us in order to be refilled. And then there is another part I believe that we all know, and in inducing, or two other things. One is that I believe every one of us has a kind of an inspirational range. So there is a kind of a sensor into the future, and that sensor has a certain range. And I believe we all know that inspirational range, which is the capacity that we can still, if something is very far out, but not too abstract to follow, so we are kind of interested. Even if we don't fully understand, we stay engaged and interested. And I believe that inspirational range is the perfect education, that's where education should happen, in that range. If it's too far out, we lose interest, and if it's too close to our experience, it's already known. So what keeps us engaged in that range, in that creative range? And I believe that that range is something that we can increase. So there are kind of inner practices, how we can increase the range to perceive what I call the future. If the future is the higher development that we grow into, it's kind of potentiality. And the second thing is that relation has two aspects. One part of relation is the belonging, to be part of a relational network, to be part of a team, and to be able to create coherent relations. The other part is that within the relation, we actually practice space. Because between you and I is not only air. I believe between us there is consciousness, there is space, there is creative space. And when we engage with someone in an inspirational dialogue, that inspirational dialogue has a creative flow. It's kind of an upward spiral. And so that there is an inspiration that is intrapersonal, that happens in me, but there is an inspiration that I can only experience with you. Or if you, whoever is you, one person, a team, so there is an interpersonal inspiration. And again, the same thing, we have structure, we sit in the same room, we have energy, that's the mutual eros, and we have space in between us. And the space allows us to be creative. And so if we combine all of what I said until now, I believe that, for example, science, whatever the science is, and the inner science, the knowledge that we know from the contemplative traditions, from the wisdom traditions, if we combine it, I think there is a very powerful practice, because the contemplative traditions can train, I can train to increase the capacity of receiving the future. But through my professional training, I concentrate my intelligence. So through the inner practice, I open myself, I open a space. Through my practice, I concentrate myself through my professional practice. And if I combine both, I can create something like what we call kind of inspirational laboratories, so that I use the inner practice to open myself, but it's based upon a professional kind of experience and concentration or crystallization. So where the intelligence that is already crystallized in a profession uses the aspects that I said before, especially the inner space capacity and increasing my reach into the future, in order to create in small groups very intense practice environments to what we call download the future. That receiving future potential is something that I can open myself to, that I can train my nervous system to receive. And maybe let's pause here for a moment, because I say many things that I throw out here into the room, and I would love to first see if so far questions, statements, anything that you want to add, and then I will continue a bit more. Let's first digest what we said so far. Yeah.
You paused at the essence. You paused at the essence or essential moment.
Wait, I will try to give you my microphone. No. Maybe say it without microphone.
Yes. You paused at the notion of essential moment or essence.
Right.
And then said you'd come back. And what occurred to me in that moment, when I thought of essence, I thought of like nurturing. And I think that is some sort of essential energy, and it may be because I'm feminine or something like that. And yet the direction you were going seemed to have to do with space or emptiness, which seems further away from what I was thinking. But I would like you to come back and address the essence.
Right, I will come back to the essence. I will listen to a few comments and then I'll come back to the essence, yeah. You want that? Mm-hmm.
I think the front, I found
You said something about how the process of manifestation kind of mirrors the developmental process. And I was wondering if what you meant by that was something about, like if you have an inspiration for an idea, that you sort of follow that curiosity out for a bit until you hit a fear spot and then kind of come back to safety, if that had something to do with it, or maybe if you could just say a little more what you meant by that.
Yes, so what I observe in the work with many people every day is that if that process of creating what we call a base that is safe, secure, and related, if relation is safe and trustworthy as a kind of a natural imprint in oneself, so the capacity to translate inspiration or potential into substance, to have an inspiration and follow it through, create a structure like a company or something that's needed, and follow it through into its manifestation is easier if my capacity to relate has been either hurt or ambivalent, whatever, it's filled with fear. So then the translation often hits those areas. So my creativity or the essentiality of who I am and how I want to express myself in the world is, there's a tendency that I will have a harder time to translate it into substance, to translate it into a world. And basically, the way I look at human beings is that we are kind of animated planet, because the water and the carbon in my body is the planet. So in a way, we are constantly, we are part of the game board that we experience. We are part of the world that we experience. And in an open state, I feel myself as an integral part of life. The more I am either traumatized or strongly conditioned or insecure or my base has been hurt, the more I feel either distant or overly attached. So we see either somebody leans in too much and we are locked in the state of having to say yes in more moments than we would like to, or we lean out too much and we feel distant, but we're actually afraid to create intimacy. So either I'm overly attached or I'm leaning out and I'm overly distant. But only in my center I'm related. I'm related when I'm in my center, so I have a choice. And the choice is to say yes or no. But not every grown-up human being has a choice. Because sometimes some of us have to say yes more often than we actually naturally want to. And some people are, by habit, leaning out. And so when I'm in the center, I believe the capacity to translate innovation into a world that is a co-creative cultural process, so that we design the house consciously that we live in, that's, I think, happening when that structural process worked well for us and we are kind of resting in it. So there's more courage, there's more curiosity, there's also a healthy self-contact and a healthy self-regulation. I know what I can do and I know where are my limits. And because I know it's trustworthy. There are some people that tend to be more or less in themselves than the potential that is already manifest. And that's usually, when we feel this, it's also, then we don't know in the relation. And that's how we create our social network then. So the kind of the capacity to innovate and the capacity to relate are inherently connected. So becoming and belonging are both forces of the creative process. And if it's essential, then we touch a creative moment, but there's a translation of that creative moment into and as the world, because we are inherently the game board. We are not on the game board. We are the game board. We are the cultural architecture of the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
Yeah, in creating space, so that one is not tied to 2017. I'm wondering about the way in which you manage your information intake related to the world.
Say the last sentence.
Sure.
Right?
How do you manage your information intake about the world as part of your discipline for space creation?
Mm-hmm. So that's a beautiful question. First of all, for some people, there is a kind of a spontaneous moment where the dimension of inner space or inner presence appears. For other people, it's a consequence of a regular practice. And for other people, it's a consequence of a very intense time of practice. So there are different ways how we create it, but I think we first need to have a taste of the dimension of timelessness or space within us. And in our practice, mindfulness is a kind of a fashionable word. But what is mindfulness? Mindfulness starts with a coherence of awareness with sense perception. So that I sit here and I'm aware that I'm breathing. I'm aware of what I see. I increase my resolution of my sense perception. And usually when we do that, when we practice, so as I sit here, I feel my body sitting on the chair. I feel myself breathing. I'm aware of my surrounding. I feel the air. So I can practice to increase the resolution of my sense perception. But usually what happens if I do that consciously, I can notice that within me, suddenly I notice a dimension of stillness or presence or kind of an inner spaciousness that has a deeper expansion or has a dimension of depth. And then that's the second level of the kind of contemplative practice. And then usually that expands until it switches into another brainwave pattern, which is kind of the subjective experience of kind of a burning presence wherever we are, the burning presence. And usually in the meditation practice, in that moment, the sense of our body perception, of our emotions and of our thoughts slowly disappears. So it's kind of that most of the qualities that I identify myself or I define myself through, my body, what I think, what I feel, disappeared. In a very strong meditative moment, those qualities disappear, but there is still a sense of presence. And so, why I'm saying that is because once I have a strong enough taste, what I practice then is the coexistence of stillness, inner stillness, contemplative stillness, and the world, the experience of the world, as a coexistence. So once I have a deep enough taste, it's kind of once I know how to play the piano and I know the practice, I can start to improvise and be played. And so the intake of information and the inner space start to coexist. And so the more the dimension of inner spaciousness is present, the less I'm fully consumed by the information that comes through my senses. The sensory input it's like suddenly the cup is bigger. The same amount of water doesn't fill the cup because the cup is now much bigger. And So then I'm actually more free, even in very intense or full moments. I'm not getting anymore as absorbed as I was maybe 5 years ago. And the interesting thing is we did in one of our 3-year training programs, we had a study with a university in Germany, and kind of a neuroscience study about meditation. And so 20 of the students and myself, we went to the fMRI and meditated with all kinds of measure and the fMRI and EEG and all kinds of stuff. And there were 5 or 6 MA works that have been written. And what one of the results that we saw is that we could see that the experienced meditators had a way faster kind of drop in to depth than the beginners. So the beginners kind of stayed kind of on the surface. But after 1 year, the people who were beginners had a much faster improvement than the kind of long-term meditators. So the improvement within the year was kind of quite fast, that the initial beginners after 1 year had a significant improvement in the fMRI checks. And so what I'm saying is that once we establish, we call this in our work inner coherence, that the physical, emotional, and mental and inspirational capacity create like one inner line, and there is a space dimension that embraces it. And I believe that that's kind of key for well-being, and it's also key for healthy self-contact and stress management. So that my capacity to regulate myself within very challenging situations increases. And many of the people that I see practicing and improving that, I think would say a similar thing. That once I can manage to walk, I don't know, or be in the biggest traffic jam and walk in the forest, and actually I'm not losing that inner dimension of expansion or stillness. So then it's kind of a new experience that has multiple effects in our inner kind of regulation functions. Does this answer your question, or is there?
What I wrote down was that inner coherence will help me read the Times.
Very good. Yeah. In our times. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you conceive human being like a tree, where the roots as being cast, and a desire to reach the sky as future. So I guess is it possible to grow into, infuse the...
Stand up, just stand up and talk. Stand up and talk.
So I guess, is it possible to infuse the past with the future, where the tree roots are growing, but that's part of the future, but it's still part of the past?
Yeah. Yes. So this brings me to a kind of another related topic, is that in the mystical understanding, we're saying that the future always has the power to rewrite the past. And so what we train a lot, especially there are many therapists and coaches and psychologists coming to our training programs. And so what we train a lot is that if I can use my whole central nervous system as a kind of a human keyboard, And if every level, like in our understanding, every level of your or anybody's development here is in a way accessible like in a file of information. Like when you go to your browser and you look at all the websites that you opened in the last days. So let's say the whole human development is accessible, which means if a trauma happens at the age of 3 years, let's say, for a human being, that trauma, if it's not healed or integrated, lives at that age right now. Everybody who experienced a strongly overwhelming situation that is still active lives at that age. So when we say we are in the integration process or in the trauma integration process, we are the future that has the possibility to access that past. And if we do it skillfully, so we are literally the future that infuses information into that past and helps it to resolve. And if we accept this kind of assumption as a possibility, then we would say, yes, that the future that we bring in always changes also part of our past, of our habits, and creates kind of a domino effect into the past. So we rewrite basically part of the past. So the future rewrites part of the past. And I think that's a very important aspect in understanding healing, or even, in my understanding, to work with genetic predispositions or genetic tendencies. In the work between genetic tendencies and cultural environments, that process is, I believe, key for kind of public health, so to speak. So yes, I think that principle is very...
And also I think, I feel that process is also useful to get rid of karma, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, there are different ways how to name the same thing, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on, try this out, how the future affects the past in looking in collective systems, large social systems. I know that you're doing a lot of work in Israel, and I'm wondering if you can kind of knit in to this model, the the past interaction between the Jews and Germans during the Holocaust, and how that maps to Israelis and Palestinians, and then how it maps into the future with the response of the Germans to the Syrian refugees that are coming into Germany from the ongoing war.
Yeah. A small question. Yeah. So first of all, where to start? So first of all, one thing that we did, because I observed in many group retreats that I gave in Germany, I observed a similar process pattern. And then I started to study that process pattern, and I saw that from a certain level of relational safety and coherence and relational intimacy within a group of people, and that there's another thing that I need to add first is that I believe that our nervous system is super intelligent. And not only because of the way that we can think, also because of the way how it saved us, or it saves us very often. And that, like in the army, we give kind of medals to the people that do great and, I don't know, very powerful things. But in culture, we actually abandon the parts of us that are the most heroic. So the weakness of today was actually the hero of yesterday, but somehow we don't recognize it. Which means a trauma symptom in us we might label today as weak and something that we want to get rid of, but actually it's one of the most intelligent processes that saved our further development at that time. So that weaknesses are actually no weaknesses, they are regulation functions, and usually we try to label them as problems and want to get rid of them instead of taking them in again, back, and integrate them. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I believe the nervous system in the right conditions will release information or trauma material in order to integrate it. So what was overwhelming then and couldn't be processed then can be integrated in the right circumstances. And one of the key elements of trauma work is relation. Because what led up to the trauma was an inappropriate relation in most of the cases. So what heals it is an appropriate restoration of relation. And so what I observed in groups, when we substituted an appropriateness and an intensification of relation, suddenly, in many people in the room, suddenly 40, 50 people started to cry and see terrible visions, like eruptions of collective trauma material that is stored in our unconscious lakes, and suddenly had a possibility to erupt. And so what we did then is we said, okay, I can do this with 100 or 150 people, but we will need to enlarge the container if we want to have a cultural impact, and if we want to look deeper at the unconscious lakes of information that are underneath our cities and that affect our cultural architecture, then we need to do deeper work. So we increased and we did bigger and larger events in order to look at those dynamics with many, many therapists, and so it was kind of big events. And what I came to see is that, as I said, from a certain level of inner coherence, relational coherence, so we need some certain factors. The nervous system allows a certain aspect of unconscious material to release. Now, that's important because I believe that the Holocaust actually lives in us, or in many people in the world, in our nervous systems 24/7, and just the focus of our consciousness, the spotlight of our consciousness is somewhere else. But in the moment we take that flashlight and we bring it back into that place, it's there. And the Holocaust is just one. So there are many, many other collective trauma lakes in different areas around the planet. And so, in my understanding, that's a huge factor when we look at public health and the costs in our health system. Because if that unconscious tension that we experience in these collective trauma processes is there all the time, so we know how much tension our bodies need to manage all the time. And because we don't feel it doesn't mean it's not there. It's kind of modulated, it's kind of suppressed. Now, the reason why I say this is if in knowing this, it's kind of clear that wherever we take the pain and the trauma of unspeakable atrocities, it will have an effect. So all of what you asked is definitely part of the dynamic of that past, and is an attempt of life to kind of resurface material that is suppressed, of course, and that has been passed on through generations. And so yes, I think there are many effects. What those effects are and how we interpret them and label them, I think we need to be careful in boxing it in too fast. But I think that there are definitely strong effects also in the refugee crisis. And the interesting thing right now in Germany is that actually the cold trauma is being activated by a hot trauma. So that by 1 million refugees coming from a war zone into a country that has a cold trauma layer, there's a lot of intensity being set free, and I think that's not only in Germany like this, that's in different places in Europe like this. So on the one hand we could say, wow, that's an amazing chance for integration, but it's also an amazing chance for destruction. So it's a two-folded path. And so that's why I'm so passionate about collective trauma, because I believe the next level of understanding cultural architecture is in understanding the dynamic of the collective traumatization and how many aspects of our lives are affected by it. If we were to say, what is the moon? Is the moon, or the moon and everything that's affected by it? And so when we say, is the Second World War and the Holocaust 39 to 45? Or is it 39-45 and all the effects throughout generations? How many generations will the world need in order to balance that time? So that's a huge tree of effects that ripples out through generations. And I think there are two possibilities. Either we take care of this through conscious exploration and really dedication, or we take care of it like next generations will need to take care of it, or many more generations. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's deeply part
of the world. Maybe we're a business or we're a nonprofit organization that had a very strong vision, but things are not functioning. The creativity, we're stopped. So you spoke earlier how we can easily kind of habitualize each other, make everybody's predictable to each other, and that can stagnate the situation. But you also mentioned collective trauma, and there are times in these situations I think there is collective trauma, be it past disappointments, past failures. That's a relatively mundane situation, but I think that this occurs on a regular basis in businesses and in well-meaning organizations.
Of course. That's why I mention it, because if in the structural development of a human being, if we say a human being is like the closest circle of intimacy is the self-contact that everyone has with him or herself. And if then there's the family, the closer community or team members, and then the wider community, maybe my state, and then maybe me as a global citizen as the capacity to be intimately related and caring for that radius of life. So if I cannot just be a cognitive participant, but an intimately related and caring human being in a certain radius of life, which means I feel you, I include you, I can take your perspectives, you can take my perspectives, and we have a relation. But what we see through technology now is that the global dimension is being highlighted very strongly. So the global brain and the whole kind of internet world and communication world gave us much more time. Every minute or every half an hour we spend on Facebook, Google, reading all kinds of stuff on the internet, we actually spend global time. And that global time gets subtracted from the rest of the circles of intimacy now. So this will affect how much time I spend with my wife, with my children, how much time I spend with my colleagues. If I'm on the internet during my working time, it will have effect, and so on. So the next level of horizontal development of global awareness gives me access to global innovation. So I suddenly learn about so many people that learn about innovation right now, and they inspire me, and maybe I inspire them, and there's a huge firework of creativity. But I also have an enormous trauma exposure. Which means when I read about ISIS and I read about London terror attack and I see it on my phone or I read it on the internet, so immediately I'm connected to a global trauma field as well. So I'm affected by actually very strong forces, and my nervous system needs to be able to deal with it. And our nervous systems sometimes will get overloaded, and then it's very important what kind of regulation functions I have. And if my regulation functions are well developed, so then it's easier. But if here is strong conditioning or traumatization, then I will not be able to regulate myself, and then I need to regulate myself through something else. And also in companies, what is a company? A company is a relational network. Culture is agreements. Culture is agreements, is relational agreements that we somehow keep or we don't keep them. And so if I am traumatized or not well attached, so then my way of creating corporate culture will be affected by it. And the higher I am in the hierarchy, the stronger will be the effect, because I'll spread my energy throughout the whole corporation. And that if collective trauma, especially in global organization where many cultural bodies come together, so that's a huge challenge. And then we want to bring innovation, and innovation means more speed. Innovation means a faster speed of data, a faster speed of processing, and that means more stress and more somatic. The radius increases, the speed increases, so I need a capacity inside to balance that. If I have a healthy inner practice, how to balance and how to regulate myself, perfect. You know, we are meant to have evolutionary pressure, but evolutionary pressure is healthy only to a certain degree, then it's creative. If evolutionary pressure is too hot, then it burns us. And I think we see in the increase of mental health problems and in general all kinds of symptoms that of many people's nervous systems get burned. And I think traumatization is a huge factor. And especially collective traumatization, it's kind of something that we have been born into, and it's a fact. It's kind of, we are wrapped in, it's kind of, we have been born into the Holocaust or into all kinds of genocides. So today, I'm looking through it because I have been born into it. And I see the world like that. I often ask the question, how come that we accept the fact that the health system doesn't have enough money? The one aspect of us that keeps us healthy as individuals and as cultures doesn't have enough money. And then we might say, oh, that's the way it is. No, that's not. That's a symptom. That's not the way it is. I believe it's a symptom of the distortion of time, space, and the trauma distortion of our culture.
So then it's a combination of inner practice and the outer understanding of these principles so that we can consciously, as an individual, as a group, as a team, be aware of these. That's what the Pocket Project is all about then, right?
Right.
About
right. That we bring the best of the outer competencies and sciences and the best of the inner competencies and sciences together, and we create kind of the high excellence of both capacities in the way how we address all kinds of challenges in the world, for sure. And I think in so many corporations that we often kind of burn a lot of energy with symptoms, because when we come back to what is essential, if I live an essential life means I'm not hypnotized by the symptoms. I'm not hypnotized by the symptoms of relations. I'm not hypnotized by the symptoms of bigger situations in the world, in corporations, institutions, intimate relationships with my children, so that I what's my capacity to meet the essential aspect of my current experience. And I believe that essential aspect of whatever it is, the essential aspect in finding out how to deal with a new virus in the world. It doesn't matter what it is. How do I get to the essence of the moment so that the essence is creating a new movement right now.
Yes.
And I think that's a capacity, but that's something that I believe we can practice. And then I don't waste my time in dealing with symptoms, with interpersonal symptoms, but I listen through the symptoms and I listen to the origin of that symptom. So then I waste less energy, I'm much more energy efficient, and I'm much more effective in what I do. And I believe that's a function of a depth dimension of consciousness and of clarity and crystallization in practice.
That's a beautiful concept, thank you. Not being hypnotized by the symptoms. That's something that
Right.
could really hang on to. Thank you.
Right, and in order not to be hypnotized by the symptoms, I need to be able to be where I am. Because if I'm identified with my own symptoms, I will be caught by all kinds of symptoms. So if I'm caught up in my own time, what I call this time-space separation. So that trauma not only has an effect of freezing and overactivity in our nervous system and therefore hyperreactive responses or distant responses, it also, in my understanding, creates a distortion in time-space. And time-space distortion means that I feel separate in time and space, and I need to process an experience later in time. We call this after time. Kind of a therapist spends many hours a day in after time of their clients, because we are dealing with taking care of the stuff that already happened that still affects my moment. It's kind of, you sit in the movies, you watch a movie, and suddenly you see advertisements being projected onto your movie. So you feel fears affecting your decision making, you feel all kinds of stuff that has nothing to do with the current moment. And so you see the movie of life, but it's overshadowed, and it has many kind of commercials and all kinds of projections on top of it. And if that's the case, I will not be able to be essential, because I'm hypnotized by my own past the whole time. I'm hypnotized by my own time-space distortion. That I either hang out in the past with my mental process or my emotional process, or I'm in the imagination of a future, not in the emergence. The emergence of the future that is emerging is here right now. It's emerging right now. And everybody who knows creative processes knows once you're in a creative process, you're so present that the future emerges through you right now. But that's not because I don't want to be here. I imagine a future that is better than my experience. That's not the future. That's my kind of daydreaming. And the same is, so, or in space, I feel distant and I don't feel connected as an integral part of life. And if I don't feel connected to the global world, and I read the news, and I'm dissociated when I read the news, I will not care. But if I really care, I also feel the trauma that I read about. And that's a different world. So we call this kind of the intimate internet. It's kind of when the internet is a connected human space, not a cold technological space. So that we fill the space that we create with awareness. Yeah. Yeah.
You spoke about human beings being where the intersection of lovemaking with the past and the future. I'm curious about how that translates with regard to non-physical consciousness or non-ordinary consciousness, and how you're, consciousness that can't be measured yet.
Say more about non-physical consciousness. What do you mean?
Ancestral consciousness, spiritual consciousness that lives and activates, particularly in some of these collective fields, outside of the central nervous system or in our bodies, working with fields beyond human form. Just curious if you include that in your training with regard to generational trauma and how it's passed.
Of course. I'm not sure if that's not living in my nervous system as well. But so, and definitely, we see this in therapy when people go to therapy and they have essential transformations. Usually their family systems, their parents, something starts to shift. It's not because a human being is not separate. As a human being is part of a system. So when something changes in the system, it changes the system. So in my understanding of inner developmental work, I say it's kind of like, let's say you go and you have a transformational experience. It's kind of, you take a spoon that is hard, you take it up, you heat it up, it gets softer and softer, you change its form, and then you cool it down again. So now you have, let's say it's a spoon from your kitchen. So then you come home, and then you want to put the spoon back into your kitchen drawer. But because it's not straight anymore, it doesn't fit into your kitchen drawer. So you need to change your kitchen drawer. And then you need to change your kitchen because the drawer doesn't fit into the kitchen. You need to change your flat or your house, and you need to change the city that the house is in. So in my understanding, if I sit alone in a cave in the Himalayan mountains, it's one thing. But if I am part of a cultural field that I am co-creating as I'm living, so my change is just the first test. The second test is how my change affects the culture around me, my partner, my children, my colleagues. So if you have a strong transformation, you come back to work, the way how you will implement and expand your change within the social environment that you live in is key. Because if not, then it kind of gets rewritten by your environment. So, and I think it's a very important process. So, of course, the family system and the roles that people take on and the functions that people take on will have to change because the system is a system. So, of course, I think the ancestral impact is very important. Yeah. And it's not something that happened and it's over. It's something that is still happening if there is still an unresolved past. And if there's no unresolved past, we don't think about it. So the past, I believe, is only the past because there's still an unresolved aspect to it that makes us think about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
So on the same line of thoughts, I'm curious about the future past. What is a good order of practice? Because there are schools that say if you just meditate, open up, bring the future in, bring the light in, it will automatically take care of the past and help clear it. And there are schools who say you really got to go work the past, bring that through. Do you have an idea what's a good order, or do they happen simultaneously?
Yeah, I can just tell you my understanding about it, what I observe in my work. What I observe is that there, as I said, that there are two forces. The past is either structures in consciousness that we use, for example, that my liver stays a liver, or that I have an emotional system, that I have a cognitive capacity, that has been kind of grown and built over thousands of years of human history. So that's my healthy structure. So that structure needs updates. The future is kind of I download new possibilities of humanity through insights and innovation. I implement it. So how does it come? Once I think in the mystical understanding, it's kind of we receive information and then it appears as a thought. And then I get excited about the thought. So I feel something. I feel, wow, cool idea. And then I deal with it, I look at it, I walk with it. So I embody my idea more and more and more. And then I share it with other people, I have interesting dialogues, and like this, I pull it into manifestation, so to speak. I make it substantial. And so when that process, when the system is open, then the light can, like the past has a drive to grow into the future, but I believe that the future calls us also. There is a future that we can listen to. And so when we bring in the subjective experience of a meditator, besides presence, there is light and information, or knowing. And that appears often as a kind of an inner light experience. So if the light comes in and it can flow through, great. So then it's more fluid. Usually what I see often is when people, the traumatization, when the future hits the traumatization, then the symptoms of the trauma are being reinforced. And then we have to take care of it because it creates kind of a block in the system, and the person will feel even more pressure. That's why when people, for many people, when they engage with a serious inner practice, they will actually feel for some time a very strong inner turmoil or process, because many places inside that are not fully developed will start to rattle, consciously or unconsciously, which is in itself a good process, but if it's not properly facilitated properly, so it's gonna be difficult, because it can create all kinds of disturbances. That's why a strong inner practice is a very powerful thing. And if you don't have the right knowledge and know-how about those processes, when you read, for example, kind of writings of saints that lived, I don't know, in different traditions, often they had a kind of a strong illumination experience, a kind of a unifying or unity experience, and then they ended up in 3 or 6 months of deep depression. So for somebody that knows kind of the inner side, the knowledge of it, that's a natural process. But if we don't know that, it looks like something went totally wrong. If we can facilitate that process, it's actually a very healing and integrative and opening process. If not, then people might end up in psychotic states. So there's all kinds of there's a whole range to it. So I don't think the light, it only takes care of itself. I think that's why we need some professional knowledge in order, for some people it's easy, and for some people it's not easy at all. Kind of an inner opening. So then the trauma actually needs to be facilitated and integrated professionally, so for the person to continue their own inner evolution. And it's not only, the personal trauma usually rests on stages before. So it's a complex process. Yeah. And then when we put inner science and outer science together, and we say, okay, if a human being is not a separate entity, so as it appears to me, if somebody practices meditation and has kind of insights, those insights, I believe, are not just individual insights, they are collective assets. So it means that I might have many insights, but I don't even have time and the capacity to do all of the stuff that I have creative insights about. And so when I believe that we are all connected, and that our inner practice actually, you might meditate and she might have an insight while she drives with her car to her workplace. Or somebody in Australia sits in a lab, and I believe that when people meditate, other people create innovation. That we are not separate. We are kind of an interrelated web, and that's why inner practice is not an individual thing. It's kind of participating in meditation. We are participating in meditation. We are not meditating is not what we do this 1 hour or half an hour when we sit down or when we practice yoga, and it's that meditation is, and we happen to be in it. But it's something way bigger than my individual life. So that's, in the West, the spiritual practice often became a kind of a me-centered, very narcissistic practice. Because it's all about me, but actually it's not about me. It's about surrendering that me into a bigger context and participating responsibly. Yeah. But does this answer your question? Or yeah. Oh, great. Good. So yes, I think that's it. Yeah. So wait, let me see if we want to find. Yeah, let's do one thing together at the end, and let's take just 1 minute and see what are the key elements for you of all the topics that we talked about. Was there anything that's kind of spoke to you, that resonated for you, or something that sparked your thinking or your creativity? And if so, see how whatever spoke to you connects to your life, whatever you do, where you come from, how you live your life. How does the resonance that you experience right now here translate back into your life? Well, great. So thank you very much for the exploration. And thank you, Ingrid, for organizing this here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming here, spending the time with us. Thank you. Thomas is starting in 2 weeks the Pocket Project. So this is on cultural and transgenerational trauma. We have around 150 people on 40 nationalities, and I'm super excited. If you want to learn more, there's the flyers behind. And also the Timeless Wisdom training, the 2-year training, is starting at some point this year, after October that I graduate, so later than that. There's also more information in the back. And Shakti back there, it's from CIC Wellness. So if you're interested in hosting an event here on these topics, you can talk to her. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.